and welcome to episode 162 of our SAP on Azure Video Podcast. Today is September 28th, and together with Robert and Goran, we are here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone. We can't escape AI. So this week, we will continue to talk about AI, this time again in the context of ABAP. A few weeks ago, we already had Gopal joining us, where he introduced us to the AI SDK for ABAP. As promised, we wanted to take a deep dive on this topic. Gopal has brought some cool examples on how you can actually use the Azure OpenAI and the AI SDK as an ABAP developer. Before we hand over to him, let me quickly share three news from this week. And just this week, there was an event, Rise into the Future. So SAP, Julia White, talked about the future of RISE, all the new capabilities, or a lot of new capabilities. Jan Gilg presented there and talked about some of the functionalities that will be released and are available with S4HANA in RISE, obviously. So it is available for anyone to take a look. So you just need to register, and then you can take a look at the recording. One of the big announcements there was obviously also Joule. So I hope I pronounced this correctly. The new SAP, I would call it, Copilot, the generative AI Copilot that is embedded in, or that will be embedded in S4HANA solutions, I guess. Or not only S4HANA. I think this is really across the whole SAP product portfolio. So I'm sure this will be really interesting. Let's see how this evolves. I'm sure here at TechEd and the next upcoming events, we'll see more and more of these functionalities. So I think this will be, it will be a very interesting thing to see how this evolves. One last quick thing, speaking of copilots, what I find extremely interesting is the fact that we see more and more of these company internal ChatGPT scenarios. So I think we had talked about a ChatGPT scenario for DM. Now BASF, they talked about an internal company chatbot that allows here all of our 110,000 employees of BASF to use a chatbot and GPT and LLM enabled chatbot with Azure OpenAI, obviously within the boundaries of your company data. So I think it's really fascinating to see these investments across companies, because honestly, if you go to GitHub on the Azure sites, there's really a very nice tutorial of how to get started, how to connect and build such a GPT-based chatbot that really stays within your company and where you can empower your employees to use GPT in a very controlled environment. So as promised, this is a very short update this week, which is good actually, because this leaves us a little more time to talk about the AI SDK. And as said, we had Gopal already previously in the show. At that point, he talked about the foundation of how to get started, what the AI SDK for ABAP is. He talked about how you can install it, how you can configure it. He talked about all the documentation. And now I'm really happy, Gopal, to have you back on the show. I guess most of our viewers have seen you before, but still, maybe can you quickly introduce yourself? And then let's head over to the demo.
Thank you, Holger. Thank you for having me back and bearing with my excitement and the talks and all those kind of things. Thank you so much for having me back here. I'm Gopal Nair. I work at Microsoft. I'm a developer. I work in the SAP platform engineering team here at Microsoft. And, my passion is about exploring new areas, technologies, and technology fascinates me. And artificial intelligence, of course, just like everybody else probably in the planet right now, very excited about the possibilities of it and how it can be used for very creative purposes, especially within SAP, because SAP as an enterprise system has a ton of data and and a lot of impact in business running. And so if we have the ability to supercharge those functionalities that is already supercharged with SAP as a solution, that would be an awesome thing. And my focus, there are different ways to skin the cat, but my focus was also on, hey, how do we minimize the movement of data between the different systems, but at the same, and hence increase performance and efficiency and things like that, and go directly many a times from the single source of truth, which is the SAP system itself. And so that's how AI SDK was born, in terms of ABAP as a programming language, or the choice programming language within SAP environment, the ABAP application stack. How do we use ABAP programming language and make it easy for others to interact with the artificial intelligence engines that are out there? Like, for example, OpenAI or Azure OpenAI, which is a more enterprise-ready solution of artificial intelligence. So all these things was the inspiration behind AI SDK. So last time, yeah, so that's me.
No, perfect, Gopal. And as you said, I mean, in the last episode, you basically laid the foundation and talked about what it is, what you can do with this. You even showed us a quick demo. But I think today we wanted to take a closer look at, let's say now we have it installed. So what can I do with it? And I think you have a really nice example there prepared.
Right, sure. So last time we talked about the where the documentations are and what AI SDK, the GitHub repository, and the installation, quick installation, and just as a quick recap. And if you don't mind, may I share my screen?
Of course.
So just as a quick recap, we have the GitHub repository over here. The AI SDK. This is where you can download and install AI SDK, and the act of, or the how to install it, the steps, etc., that can easily be viewed in the documentation website, specifically the resource setup and installing the SDK. So if you are targeting Azure OpenAI, the steps to initialize or set up Azure OpenAI is detailed here, especially with and even a video recording, and installing the SDK and the certificate is also available both as documentation as well as the video. So please do refer to that as a starting point for this session. So here we are assuming, based on our previous discussions, etc., that you have the AI SDK installed in your application server, and you have an Azure OpenAI already set up following these steps. So today, and last time we talked about a demo program where we are listing the models that are available for the account and so on and so forth. But today, let's do something a little bit more fun. When we generally refer to artificial intelligence or AI and things like that, we are actually talking about completions. The completion is where the generative AI kind of fully comes into picture. And there are some other things, embeddings and many other things, but primarily we are talking about completion, something we provide as a prompt to the artificial intelligence engine, and then we get back a whole generated response, which is useful for us in some way, shape, or form. That entity that is coming back can be maybe code, where we saw some examples of AI SDK being used for co-piloting, like when to generate ABAP code. We had some demos that we saw, beautiful demos in LinkedIn from one of our colleagues, and many other applications, Splunk, and deciphering ST22 dumps and so on and so forth. There are many applications, but so those are the generative nature of it. Today, let's dive a little bit deeper using the documentation to figure things out as well, and maybe write a program from scratch. So there are always the demo programs, but let's write a program from scratch, which uses some of the tables that are already present in SAP, and then showcase how we can create a prompt through code, and then issue a command to the AI engine, and then get back the response and display it all using AI SDK for SAP. For this purpose, let's use the completions part. So with the resource setup and installation of the SDK complete, I just wanted to make sure we are on the same page. So I have my Azure OpenAI resource setup here, just like we followed those very same steps. And specifically the keys and endpoint, if we go here, we have the endpoint available here as well as the key. And we can copy the key to use. And we'll do that very soon here in to be used in our program that we are going to create. And if we look at the deployment right now, so I have a couple of models that are deployed already. And if we look at the deployment, I have a DaVinci 003, for which I very non-creatively, I just named it Gopal DaVinci 003. But so I just named it that way. But this is the model or deployment that we are going to use for our demo program, or for our hands-on. All right. So with that said, let's go ahead and create a program where I'm going to create a new program. So let's say ABAP program. So let's well, what are we going to do? Let's see the SFLIGHT model or the flight model that is present in pretty much every EC system and S4 system today.
Yes.
So let's keep it simple. What we are going to do is we'll write a program which is going to say get some records from say SFLIGHT, the program model, the flight model, and then those so in one of the tables, like for example SPFLI, there are airport codes, right? So FRA, San Francisco, and Seattle, so on and so forth. Now, why don't we use AI, generative AI, to provide it with the airport codes and then get back a whole description about the airport. Right.
Really
so
nice. Yeah.
Maybe we can again, this is just an example, and this same technique can be used for many other purposes as well. But as an example, let's do that, and then we can discuss further on what other areas can be. So let me just name this, say Z demo airport info. Right. So a demo program for airport information. So remember, just by providing an airport code, there is nowhere inside SAP that the airport description and so on and so forth is stored. It's a key, right? So I'm just creating this, and all right. So I have a blank program. At this point, I'm at the very beginning stage of, let's say, understanding and learning AI SDK. So documentation website is our go-to guide, right? So let me switch over to the documentation website, and then we will use the documentation that is available to construct the program. So to that end, I'm switching over to the documentation website here. So after the initial setup, so we go to the working with SDK section, and let's see how to initialize the SDK. So it all starts with initializing the SDK, starting up the SDK. As we start up the SDK, there are certain parameters that we need to give. And as we see here, there is API version, base, type, key, and so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and then figure out how to get these different parameters that are needed for initializing the SDK. So to that end, let me just go ahead and copy this initialization code with these placeholders present, and then put it as our starting point in this. Obviously, this is going to give me a compilation error. Now, how do we get this API version, API base, and so on and so forth? Again, the documentation is our guide. So here, as we scroll down, we have the API version, base, etc. documented, and this is when we are using Azure OpenAI. So in API base, we have a URL, and API type, we have the Active Directory as well as the API key parameter, so on and so forth. Let's switch over to our resource and then go to the keys and endpoint. And here is the endpoint that we are going to use. So I'm going to copy that to the clipboard and put that into the API base, right? So here is the base URL, right? Now, API version, let's go ahead and look at what all API versions are supported. Again, I click on the API version, I get to the API version section. At this point, the latest stable version that we support is 2023-515. So I'm going to copy that version, or we have a constant that is already defined. So for now, I'm just going to put this constant, the string over here. All right. Now, the API type. What would be the API type? So again, we go back and we are going to use for now the key. Keep in mind, for secure, based on your security needs or like, the access needs, Active Directory or federated authentication is also supported, or OAuth2 flow is also supported. But for now, for keeping things simple, let's use the key. And so for that, I'm going to use this constant, API type Azure. So API type, I'm going to define as Azure. All right. And there is Azure and Azure AD. If you are going to use the OAuth token flow, then you can specify this as AD, and then otherwise the Azure. And then if you specify Azure, the next one is the key that is needed. And where do we get that from? Again, our resource that is deployed. Over here, let's come to the key one, copy that, and then let's put the key. And don't worry, Holger, I know what you're thinking. The key, we will rotate it as soon as our as soon as this discussion is over. And the SDK profile and the params, for now, we will discuss about the enterprise control and a little bit more advanced topic in the next session. But for now, let's ignore those. These are the important parameters that are needed for initializing the SDK. Now, when this code gets executed, this SDK has all the information to start interacting with the AI engine. It knows the location, it knows the type of authentication, so on and so on, and the API version, etc., that is to be used. But at this time, we haven't asked it to do anything. It has just come to life. And now from here on out, we are going to use the different modules within the AI SDK. Again, if we look at our documentation website, so we see that there are different modules, models, deployments, files, fine-tuning, and so on and so forth. We just brought the SDK to life through the initialization. Now we are going to do the completions operations as we discussed initially. And what are we going to do? Using the completions, we are going to give it a bunch of airport codes, and then we want the AI engine to generate some airport descriptions and then give it back to us so that we can show it. So to that end, let's go ahead and open this table called SPFLI, which has some sample data, and then let's look at what the contents are. And so if I go to the SAP GUI, this is. All right. So if I look at the contents of this table, I have a whole bunch of these carrier IDs and some airport codes, airport from and to, which has the airport codes, JFK, FCO, TYU, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is just write a simple ABAP code to get some of these airport codes. Let's say we are going to look at Lufthansa or LH as the carrier ID, and then get a bunch of these airport codes. Yep. And then submit those airport codes to the AI engine to get a full information about what these airport codes mean. There is nowhere in SAP where the description of this airport codes, etc., are stored. So we want to supplement our information that we are displaying with a description of the airport code, right? So that is what we are going to do. To that end, I'm going back into the code. And as a first step, so we have initialized the SDK. Then as a first step of getting our data ready for what we are going to do, I am going to select some entries from the SPFLI table where carrier ID is LH. Now, what next happens is, so if we again take a look at our documentation website, so for completions, what we do is there is a demo program, but there are two parameters, ABAP-friendly parameters that are needed for completions creation. and that is completion inputs and completion output of these types, right? So there is a ready kind of code template over here. So let me just copy this and declare these completion input and output parameters, right? So this is where the documentation and your coding is going hand in hand and makes it easy. So I'm going to declare these parameters, completion inputs. And now let's go ahead and then start populating the prompt. To that end, I'm going to declare a string, which is like, at this point, let's say you are a travel agent, right? Mm-hmm. I'm telling the AI engine that you're a travel agent, and I'm going to instruct it with a prompt to do something. Now, I'm going to say, okay, give me a list of, I'm going to give you a list of, say, description about the following airports. And now I'm going to loop at our, airport codes. Let me loop through the airport codes that we just got from this line. Remember, we got a whole bunch of them. I'm just looping it and then constructing the string, the prompt string. All right. So with that, and finally, I'm going to say, so this is prompt engineering, the whole concept of prompt engineering. I'm sure we have heard of prompt engineering. There is a whole science behind the way in which we interact with the AI engine. So this is kind of like gets into the prompt engineering, but at the end of the day, it is basically like you're talking to the AI engine and giving it a question, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then I'm instructing it to separate these with a clear heading section so that we know what these descriptions are, right? And finally, now that I have the prompt ready, I am going to put this into our completions input prompt. Completions input, mm-hmm. and then the prompt variable. All these are part of our documentation as well on how to do it, but here we are kind of doing it live. Also, I want the response to be a little bit big, like, I want it to be a paragraph kind of thing. So I'm going to use the max tokens parameter to say that I need at least 2,000 words or tokens to be returned mm-hmm. back. What am I doing? How do I know to use max tokens? Again, if we refer back to the documentation, in the completions input, if we go to create, so if we scroll down a little bit, we have a whole bunch of parameters that the create method does or uses, and one of them is prompts. And there is a completions input, which tells us what all the different other parameters inside completion input is. So we know that max tokens means the maximum number of tokens to generate. This is why I put the tokens as 2,000. And what is prompt? It's a table of strings which has the prompt inside it. So all this is documented here, and you can refer to this during the development. Mm-hmm. With that said, so we have put the completions tokens, and then we have prepared the input for this call. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually call the completions functionality. Mm-hmm. One new thing that we are putting here is this deployment ID. And again, for understanding what that deployment ID is, as we earlier saw, I'm going to go to my deployments. This is my Azure OpenAI resource. I went to the deployments and I just named it Gopal DaVinci 003 for a model name, Text DaVinci 003. That's my deployment ID. So this is what I am putting over here as the deployment ID. During a practical productive use, Holger, the recommendation would be these different parameters, right? The API version, base type, key, so on and so forth, and deployment ID and so on and so forth, depending on the organization's policies of like storage of sensitive data and things like that. Use those policies to kind of hide this. Don't hard code it in a ABAP code. Yeah. Rather, put it as encrypted string or so on and so forth somewhere, and then use it only just in time. So that would be the recommendation. So with all that, so we have the input provided, we have the deployment ID, and then finally, what we are going to do is we are going to display the response that we received from AI engine using a CL demo output. All right. Cool. With this said, now if AI SDK was not there, the problem is you will have to do all these different operations, parsing, and so on and so forth in a native ABAP code. But here, because of the structures and the innate conversions and all those kind of things, the ABAP developer is shielded from all those underlying complexities, and they can directly use the variables, completion input variable type, and so on and so forth to interact with the AI engine. So with all that said, let's go ahead and then see if this works, right? So
let's save and activate. So we saw in the table before, in the SFLIGHT table, there were a bunch of flights and airports. You're selecting for the flights with Lufthansa.
Right. Lufthansa. And then we have a whole bunch of these airports that we are going to send, right? So I'm going to go to SE38, and then our program name is Demo Airport Info. All right, let's go ahead and run this. So at this point, the SDK is initialized. It's interacting with the AI engine after retrieving all the data. And there you go. So
really cool. So we can see,
exactly the description. This part of description and this part of a paragraph has been generated by the AI engine. All we provided with the help of that database table is this JFK as the code.
Yeah.
Everything else has been generated by the AI engine. And I mean, this is just an example. So imagine, if you get an iDoc or some other things where there is a whole bunch of text, right? And you want to parse the text. Traditionally in ABAP, parsing would be pretty difficult because your style of writing freeform text and my style of writing freeform text would be very different. Otherwise, we'll have to put rigid rules, which rules are meant to be broken. So that never works. But with all these, with the interactions and generative AI and so on and so forth, it becomes very easy for us to submit a whole bunch of text or ask to the AI engine and then get back a response, be it a parsing or retrieval of data within a whole bunch of text, or generating new text like that we just saw here, where we are simply putting a code out there, like an airport code, and then getting a whole bunch of description, which can then enhance the business process or the experience of the end user.
So that's a beautiful way, and it is fantastic to see with how little lines of code you already get some output there. But actually, Gopal, if I look at this, that's nice. Yep. I mean, the content is there, but could you beautify this a little more? Like have this as a header, then the description maybe in a different format. So how would you do that?
Oh yeah, right now it has generated the text, and we are simply showing the text. What I can do is when we get the text back, right, we can write a whole bunch of ABAP code to actually parse this text and make it an HTML document so that we can display it in an HTML document. It probably will take maybe 100 lines of code probably to make this an HTML code and so that it is beautified. But that is a very small price to pay. Wait, what am I saying? Actually, I forgot something. Holger, we have this tool, this AI engine at our disposal. So why don't we do this? Let's ask AI engine itself to generate HTML for us back so that we don't have to write any of that ABAP code, even that 100 lines of code. Let's try that. Let's see what happens, right? So I'm going to exit this. I'm going to go back to the program. So let's do this. Let's change the prompt a little bit. So right now, my prompt says separate these with clear heading section. The heading sections must have a airport full name. I'm going to do one more thing here as part of the prompt. I'm going to say return the entire HTML, entire string as an HTML code, right? So I just added that
Adding
to
one single line. Okay.
One single line, right? Like, I don't know if it'll work, but let's see, right? Like, these are part of the prompt experimentation, prompt engineering, and that field. Okay, so I just added that one more line. And traditionally, if I have to convert this whole string to HTML, I would have to write a whole bunch of ABAP code. But let's see if that one single line that was added makes a difference. And let me assume that it is going to work. So for this, if you know CL demo output class, there is a dedicated method which displays HTML. And so I'm going to use that over here. So instead of display text, I'm going to use display HTML. Let's activate this.
So basically, you just added one line of additional prompt, and
Yes.
you replace the output from simple text to HTML.
Correct. So, I mean, if originally we thought that we will have to write a whole bunch of ABAP code, which takes this text that we got back, and then we'll have to parse that, convert that into HTML, and then display it. We are looking at maybe like 100 to 200 lines of code. But then that eureka moment hit for both of us that, okay, we are working with AI engine anyways, so why don't we ask AI engine itself to generate HTML code instead of giving us back a simple text, right? So that is where we modified the prompt string. And then we adjusted our code to display, simply just output or display in HTML as opposed to text. Let's see what happens.
Let's see if it's working. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to run this very same program, but this time, let's see if it works. It should display in a rich HTML format. All right, very different from what was before. So now we have a heading H1, the description, so on and so forth, where we have a more formatted text, saving us a lot of processing as well as ABAP code writing, etc. So this is part of that prompt engineering, right? What we want, we develop it as a prompt, we provide it, and then we get a response back. And as you can see, in a business process where there was some other things that needed to be done, in this case, as an example, to display it as a rich text, we needn't even write ABAP code for it. We can ask AI engine to generate the whole thing and get back to us so that we can minimize the ABAP processing and then offload a whole bunch of these generative things into the AI part. So, and this goes for like parsing and generating and so many use cases. So this is just one example of using the completions functionality for generative AI and parsing and so on and so forth. At the same time, there is also very similar thing in terms of the documentation, the GPT. So this is GPT-3. So completions deal with GPT-3. The much more powerful chat completions, GPT-4, is also available as part of the SDK. And it is a little bit different. And looking at this demo program will give you very clear idea of very, very similar to completions, just a few changes here and there. And then you will know exactly how to use the chat completion feature as well. That is part of AI SDK. So that is what I wanted to show today in terms of how to actually use completions and chat completions, etc., as part of AI SDK and initialize it and so on and so forth. Back to you, Holger.
No, perfect, Gopal. And just to quickly recap, because I think this is really, really impressive. I mean, in this very quick, short ABAP program, we basically showed two very, very interesting things. So the first one is to really create new content that is not available in the SAP system by just providing this this short airport code. With the completion, we are now able to fetch or to leverage the information that is available to GPT 3.5 to create new content, basically. In our case, to look up the airport name and also the description. That is one. And the other thing was really then to take the results and instead of, as you said, writing hundreds of lines of code to parse this result, to figure out what is the header, what is the body of the content. You just added one single line of prompt, basically, which then returned the data in a way how we wanted it. And I can definitely see, I mean, again, this is just the SFLIGHT program. This is just a simple example, but you can apply the very same logic to a sales order, to an invoice coming in, to a purchase order, to material information. Maybe you need description of your materials or something like that. So I could immediately think of thousands of examples how Azure OpenAI can help the developer to create the content here.
Right, and like it's very key point that you brought up. Like, for example, let's say you're dealing with a sales order or a purchase order, and then you have a customer reference, like, a customer name. You have the ability to enhance that customer name information from what is available in the outside world by providing the customer name to the AI engine. And remember, data is very, very, very holy, and it needs to be securely accessed. So AI SDK, so the Azure OpenAI is enterprise ready. That is something that we have to always keep in mind. Azure OpenAI is privacy friendly, like, all the things that enterprises have come to expect of an enterprise system. Yeah. Azure has it, right? So because of that, let's say you have a need for enhancing the customer's information with what is available as a generative AI from generative AI. You have the ability to send the customer information to the AI engine, then generate a whole bunch of, like, maybe credit worthiness as of a particular date, and so on and so forth. All those things can be enhanced, and the business process can be enhanced to use all this additional generated information as the companies see fit. There is a ton of possibilities, and we are within Microsoft, we are using some of these for many purposes, like, dispute management and so on and so forth, that for generative purposes. But it is very much possible to enhance business processes with the same technique we saw here.
Perfect. Well, fantastic, Gopal. So I think this was part 2 of the series. So we learned in the first part how to get started. In the second, in this part, you showed us how to develop a small program, how we can apply basically and leverage the AI SDK. And in the third part, we'll take a look at the enterprise-ready capabilities of the SDK, right?
Right. So one question that immediately comes to people's mind is, like, okay, this AI SDK has a whole bunch of features, right? Like, deployments, models, so on and so forth, and completions and things like that. What if there is a need for controlling, like, based on policies of organizations? And remember, we are dealing with enterprise data, and it has to be secured, it has to be controlled through different policies, and, like, you don't want accidental exposures and things like that. An organization's policies or data policies define how data that they have is used, even for AI generation or, like, AI interactions. A feature within AI SDK is called enterprise control, which we'll discuss about in the next session, where that gives the organization a fine granular control on which all operations can even be performed when using AI SDK. And there is profiles and things like that. But if you're curious about it and like, want to read up on it, the enterprise, the whole section in the documentation called enterprise control can be your guide, where we talk about what the thought process behind enterprise control is and how it works within the AI SDK. But we'll see all that.
Don't spoil too much. Exactly.
No. Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Perfect. Gopal, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm looking forward to our third episode, and I'm sure this will be a nice closure of this first intro, I would say, to the AI SDK for ABAP.
Thank you, Holger. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.